First time, so I should probably give you a bit of background information about myself. I've been a game dev for about 9 years. My most notable projects were I worked at Vicarious Visions on Spider-Man 3. That was like 4 or 5 years ago. Since then, I've been trying to go the indie route. I did a 2-week project that lasted 5 years called 100 Rogues, starting in 2009, and a spin-off game called 100 Trials that were both on iOS and more recently Ouya. And it's the second one, 100 Rogues, that I'm mostly going to be talking about today, where it's a roguelike RPG that has skill trees in it. So that's the focus of my talk today, is the skill trees and how to design skill trees well in an RPG. So a little more information on 100 Rogues. It was very well received. We got Eurogamer saying superb. GamePro.com called the lists, because this was back in 2009 when roguelikes were still totally underground, and now they're just all over the place, and roguelikes and roguelike likes and roguelike likes and all that stuff. So yeah, the one thing I want you to keep in mind throughout this whole talk is that yes, I'm super passionate about how we handled the game design and how we implemented our skill trees and all of that, but despite being roguelike revivalists, the game still was a financial failure. So yeah, keep in mind that this is a ton of work and a ton of risk by what we did to do what we did. Can people read that?
Read out to us.
Alright, so yeah, I'll have you know that we revitalized roguelikes and almost made 50 cents an hour doing it. So, skill trees. We all more or less know what they are. At their core, they are just a set of things that a player character can get in a game. The things are connected by lines. You start out with some of them unlocked. To get other ones that are connected to a line, you have to have the thing that is connected to it in a line or purchased. And there's different ways to get them, and yada yada yada. We all know this. So why do we have them? It lets you customize your character. You can say, I want to make a character that uses shotguns and is stealthy, or uses fire magic, or just do all these crazy things that sound fun. It gives you a personalized experience, so you can talk about how your character played versus what your friend's character was, and how they had different personalities in your heads. It gives you this feeling of advancement, so that after 30 hours you can look back and say, here's all this crap that I didn't have 30 hours ago, and I'm so much more powerful and badass now. And also, until that point, it gives you these long-term goals to reach for, so that you can sort of be like, oh, this game's going to be so much more fun once I get X. So, yeah, all of that is bullshit. It is far too mainstream for 100 Rogues, because none of it has anything to do with rules and systems. It's all this sense of, this will be fun, but it's not balance. It's not necessary for balance. It's just a cool feeling that you get, and that's not what 100 Rogues game design mentality was about. So what was 100 Rogues game design mentality? Basically, across the board, for combat or skill trees or anything else, it was just about making as many and as interesting a set of choices as possible. So here we have a skill tree for the Crusader class in 100 Rogues. We had 4 player classes. All 4 had completely different skill trees, although they had the same, more or less, form, where there was one tree with 3 things, and then one tree with just 1 that branched into 2, and then, more or less the same. So I'll quickly go over the skills here. So Crusader started with Searing Blade, ranged damage attack that hit a bunch of things in a line, Whack of Glory, just a powerful damage ability that knocked a target back, or critted if the target was against a wall, Faith, which called down the hand of God at odd times to smite opponents.
Awesome.
Weapon focus, the more you use weapons, the better you become with them. Heavy armaments, you can use heavy weapons and armors. Holy Fires deals fireball attacks around you in an AoE. Martyrin reflects projectile attacks back at enemies. Healing heals you, and a couple of stat boost abilities. So those are the Crusader's abilities, just quick overview of them. So choices. Right off the bat, because we're using these 3 different skill trees, main skill trees, you have 3 choices of which to get. And when you pick one, you're not only choosing what you want, you're also choosing what you don't want, which is really, really significant, because as soon as I picked Searing Blade on the first level, I I cut myself off from being able to take Whack of Glory or Faith for another entire game level. There were 12 levels, so that's almost 10% of the game that you just won't have those abilities. You necessarily start down a path towards this, where these are going to become more advantageous just because it's easier to get them now. And presumably, you're going to have more opportunities to use these better things. So we were constantly thinking about what every choice you made on the skill tree would mean down the road. And of course, there are passive and active skills, which is more or less certain for any skill tree. Some of them are going to be like Searing Blade, where you target an enemy, shoot a Searing Blade, and it hits them. And then there's things like Faith, where you don't actually trigger it, but God just decides to help you when he feels like it, when he thinks you're doing a good thing. And in general, active skills are better. I say better because as soon as you take a passive skill, your choices are more or less done for that ability. You don't choose to activate Faith. You choose to maybe enter battle and make it more likely that God will help you, but it's not a guarantee, and it's not something you're actively thinking about. So in general, we tried to have more active skills when possible. But nevertheless, we still did use some passives that were weird. Weapon focus, where you hit things with a sword and you get better at swords. We honestly never found a good balanced justification for that ability. It helped a bit, but again, not many interesting choices. Didn't really affect balance the way our combat rules worked. However, it made a great just sort of investment in getting heavy armaments, which was a hugely beneficial skill if you found the right loot for it later in the game. So we went back and forth a lot as to whether or not to even include weapon focus, just because it served no purpose, or almost no purpose, except to make the player invest more in heavy armaments. So yes, investing points, that was part of what that bullet's about, but also early on we played around with the idea of being able to put just 1 point in Whack of Glory or 3 points in Whack of Glory. And each additional point you put into it would knock the target back a little bit further, do a little bit more damage. What we found was that players almost universally felt compelled to get all 3 levels of something once they put in 1 point in it. They just felt like the skill isn't complete, and it was a waste of the first point at all if they didn't put more into it, which had the effect of basically putting 2 more Whack of Glories before the other two trees and making the entire thing bigger, making it less about the choices you take. I'm going to pick on MMOs a couple of times during this talk, but with the super long skill trees, once you start down them, you feel absolutely compelled to get that awesome, epic last ability in your tree, which just reduces your choices. You may as well have the computer pick for you at that point, and we wanted to avoid that at any cost, like that sense of, oh, once I get that, it'll be fun. So, as a whole, our thinking was about building strategies, which sounds really simple, but we wanted to make sure that at each of the 12 levels in the game, which again, relatively short game, we knew exactly what combinations of skills players could have for each class, and that there were some interesting strategies that felt like completely different classes or games at those levels. Again, we talk about MMOs. You see the trend in the last 10 or 15 years is to move towards the holy trinity of tank, healer, damage. The reason they do that is so that they don't have to worry about nuance within the classes, because they understand a tank can absorb this much damage, a healer can mitigate this much damage. So as long as we generally balance for these 3 roles in a party, we know that our bosses are going to not be broken, that things will at least function at a basic level, and that's about as far as they get. Whereas with 100 Rogues, we wanted to make sure that that there was a strategy to properly use Whack of Glory, so that you could, if you have a group of guys coming at you with one a little bit closer than the others, and you happen to have Whack of Glory and Faith, you knock the first one back a little bit further, which starts you in combat, makes sure that God is looking at you, so that by the time the entire group gets to you, God's had a chance to help you out more. So we looked at the different combinations of these abilities that could work, and made sure that you were able to have them by the second boss, for example, and that there would be some interest in there. And of course, we play tested the hell out of all of this ourselves and gave it to beta testers and made sure that they were giving us feedback as well. The ideal case was more or less true, that while we had a few strategies picked out that we really, really liked, like I described earlier, players were finding even more for us. And quickly, the last thing I want to talk about is stat points, these strength up, HP up guys, which were initially conceived as another infinite investment of points that, yeah, you could choose to forego a defensive ability and just give yourself more HP. Ultimately, we scaled those back to just only accepting 1 point for each stat, and frankly, we wanted to get rid of them altogether. Because while the initial motivation was to allow just straight-up combat to be a viable option, that you could just go in with an axe and boost your stats enough to get through the game, we really, really liked our active abilities and such, and it just seemed silly to give the player an option to just sort of take this headfirst gung-ho approach. But with 1 point each, there wasn't too much of a risk of doing any of that. So that's an overview of most of our decision-making process with regard to skill trees and 100 Rogues. There's certainly a lot more to it that I could say. If anyone wants to try, I have the game on my iPad over there. And yeah, so the giant qualification to all of this is I am talking strictly about the design of game rules and systems and trying to find the most elegant, balanced, interesting solutions with regard to that as possible. Any sort of, oh, let's add this because it's fun, just right out the window. And of course, all of it takes a lot of time and fine-tuning and combinatorial testing to make sure that everything works. And even for a short game that can be completed in an hour and a half, this wound up being like, it was an 18-month from start to finish project. Probably after about 6 months, it was just reworking the skills among other tasks. And at the end of 18 months, we still shipped an incredibly buggy game just because balance and reworking skills took so much priority. So tons and tons of time, and most importantly of all, 50 cents an hour. Don't forget that. Yeah, and right. So going into this project, roguelikes were again this sort of niche thing that we thought were a cool idea, and we had this philosophy that was really weird. It doesn't matter if it's fun, just look at how systems work and make those interesting. It led us to do a lot of things and ignore a lot of ideas that gave us this really unique game that people like GamePro and Eurogamer really picked up on, just because we were actively trying to be different. So final lesson is make your own rules just to not play by them. And yeah, turn down for what? That's my talk.
Anyone have questions?
Yes, questions. Guy?
What was the most entertaining balance issue that came out during testing?
Oh, balance issue.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of time spent on it, I'd assume.
That's true.
It seemed like some really fun situations.
It's been like two and a half years since I did balancing for this. I might have to get back to you on that.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'll keep thinking about it.
I had the exact same question.
Oh, really?
Basically, just like what? Can you think of like any combination that just broke everything?
Oh, well, telestabbing was one that we did eventually have to nerf, which I don't have
the sound of it.
Yeah, it is pretty good. So the wizard has an ability called Aura Siphon, where if she's using melee weapons, she can stab people and get some energy back. She also has an ability called Teleport. And there's a system in place called backstabbing, where if you're behind somebody, you crit. So she could just cherry pick, or whatever, through the level and bounce between enemies and just teleport, stab. So we left that in the game. We had to tweak energy levels a lot, and I think we added a cooldown at one point to try and make that work. But yeah, it was a hell of a lot of fun, and that did influence the one scoundrel ability, leap attack, later on, which sort of functions the same way. You jump behind somebody and can backstab them. So it gave us a lot of new ideas for both the wizard and the scoundrel to use that idea in a fun way, but without it being completely broken.
I don't know, I can appreciate like balance and good design, but I also kind of love it when I can break stuff.
Yeah.
As a gamer, like the stories that I tell people are never about like the good design that this game had. It's always about like I found a way to just break the game. That's always the best story, which is why Dwarf Fortress is like everyone talks about that game. Well, I don't know.
Oh, I love Dwarf Fortress.
Yeah, well, I don't know if everyone's as
sure.
twisted as you and me. But yeah, that game is nothing but breaking, basically, and that's why everyone loves telling stories about it, because you're just telling ridiculous scenarios that popped up in that game.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, those just arise because there's so much crap, there's so much content. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you can afford the content, that definitely works. But it
Well,
also,
Dwarf Fortress has, like, I think, like a 30-year schedule. Like, he's planning on it being done in, like, literally, like, 30 years from now.
Yeah, hopefully you can retire on it.
He still gets, like, $2,000 a month from donations.
Yeah,
That's enough.
Wow.
It's enough to survive.
Thanks so much, Wes. That
Sure
was
thing.
great.
Yeah.
The bloody last minute, just fantastic.